Got it. Okay.
We are all set. Okay. We are on.
Well, maybe we ought to go ahead and get started. Do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Yeah, we have 19 people now joining the meeting. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the October branch meeting of Redlands AAUW. We have a very special program this evening where we're going to have some guests that are going to present the pros and cons of 3 of the propositions that are going to be on the ballot. But before we begin that portion of our program, let me have Ellen Grunbaum give us our thought for the month. Okay, Ellen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Growing up in the Bay Area, I didn't initially notice how white our community was. It was the fishbowl we swam in. Then one day in my American government class at Burlingame High, our teacher passed out a pop quiz. Okay, class, no talking. You have 10 minutes to complete the test. It's worth 100 points. We hurried to get started. But we found ourselves faced with obscure questions about points of law, types of courts, how many people were in the state legislature, the name of the Secretary of Agriculture, the 12th Amendment up to the Constitution, what did it cover? A hand quickly went up. But Mr. B, we haven't studied these things yet. Put your pencil down and go to the back table, he ordered the questioner. Others defended her. That's not fair. 3 more minutes, said Mr. B. You have to get 100% correct to pass. What? That's not fair. By the end of the time, the class was in revolt. Mr. B picked up our papers, glanced through, and told each of us we'd failed, all except a couple of male students from Hillsborough. Stunned, we asked how he expected us to know these things when they weren't in our book. We appealed to the other teacher observing the class at the back of the room. We gave reasoned arguments. He was unsympathetic. Then his lesson began. We had just experienced the hostile conditions, impossible questions, and capricious decisions of a Jim Crow era literacy test, administered in states determined to prevent Black people from voting. It was a shock to us to learn about this unfairness, and it gave us a new appreciation for the civil rights marches and the need for a federally enforced Voting Rights Act. Although this lesson made a deep impression, our white middle-class college-bound class of A students from a good school did not have to live with the realities of racial injustice, since we were protected by our bubble of safety, trust, and white privilege that we really didn't understand that we had. White privilege remains invisible to many of us in America, and white people like me often can't see the white supremacy culture all around us, and we even get upset or defensive when it is pointed out, displaying what Robin DiAngelo called white fragility. But racial justice, we're all learning in these days of renewed protest over the police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others, has not been achieved in our beloved country. Our racial justice discussion group with AAUW has decided to hold hands and jump off the cliff of learning and to do as the AAUW mission encourages, which is to examine and take positions on the fundamental issues of the day, educational, social, economic, and political. So DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, was a good place to start. We first had a Zoom meeting about a month and a half ago, and we discussed the ways we are embedded in the social structures of racial injustice and need to see how we contribute to racism, whether we mean to or not. We're often fragile and defensive because we are so accustomed to being privileged. And it is upsetting to learn that even though we don't intend to be racist, we sometimes contribute to a social context that makes it really difficult for Black people. Racism is not only about the loony KKK hate mongers or the Proud Boy white nationalists, but rather something that is deeply ingrained in the way we Americans live. It's derived from American history in the structure of wealth disparities, persistent educational inequalities, and health disparities. And yet for white people, it has been hard to see, since we're steeped in our own good intentions and our own confidence that it's not we, the decent, educated, tolerant people we believe we are, who are to blame for racism, but rather we think of racism as being limited to those bigoted people with the dogs and billy clubs that prevented the voting rights marches. As people of conscience who value knowledge and learning, our first step is to own the issue. As LBJ said when he signed the Voting Rights Act of 1964, there's no Negro problem, there's no Southern problem, there's no Northern problem, there is only an American problem. Their cause must be our cause too, because it is not just Negroes, but really all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. We shall overcome. And so our discussion group is determined to go deeper, explore, and inform ourselves of what is really going on in our country, its roots, its explanations, its manifestations. Many of us educated women have spent years struggling against the inequalities related to gender and the cultural, political, social, medical, and educational discrimination that earlier generations of women faced. We used to say that some men just don't get it when we pointed out discrimination or patronizing or insensitive behavior. So hopefully, as we delve into issues of race, we'll gain insight into what we just don't get about racial injustice and our own insensitivities. So building on that first discussion, we watched an interview with D'Angelo, read a critique of her diversity training methods. We are now learning more about the 400-year history of the slave economy of America by delving into the Pulitzer Prize-winning series you may have heard of called the 1619 Project. 1619 is the year that 20 enslaved Africans were sold to British settlers in the colony of Virginia. And the authors of this project go over this 400-year history since then, saying no aspect of the country that would be formed here has been untouched by the 250 years of slavery that followed 1619, including the huge wealth disparities, discriminatory educational and health systems, legislation based on generations of governance dominated by white interests or the desire to prevent Black people from being treated as equals in places where it was against the interests of those in power. So our group is also watching the documentary called All In, The Fight for Democracy, which is about voter suppression in the United States. And it includes the story of Stacey Abrams in Georgia and the current voter struggles there, and as well as elsewhere. Some of us have started reading Caste by Isabella Wilkerson, and some of us joined an AAUW webinar on racial literacy. We're full of ideas about what to study next, but I wanted you all to know about our racial justice. These discussions is to understand the Black experiences in America more deeply and to become more intentionally anti-racist, to help dismantle the injustices that have evolved into the present intolerable situations we still face. Reading and discussion seems to be a great place to start, especially with the likes of you. Our discussions are wonderful. And if you'd like to join in any of them, we're going to be meeting again via Zoom this Thursday, October 8th at 7 p.m. Isn't that right, Erica? And we're going to be discussing All In and the 1619 project readings. 1619 has a lot of different articles in it. We can't probably discuss everything, but we'll do our best to delve into some of those. Erica Wilson is going to post the link in the chat for this discussion. If anyone wants to cut and paste the info and see how to join in, or you can contact Erica by email or me, and we'll be glad to fill you in on what we're doing. I hope you all can appreciate that this is only my second meeting and I don't really know how to do these introductory thought for the month, but that's my thought for the month. I hope you can share it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. That was fantastic. And it's so good that we have a new group that's starting on a discussion in AAUW based on a book that several of you read and moving on from there and making progress in that direction. Okay, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can start our program for us.
All right, Ellen, you're a hard act to follow. Great job. All right, tonight we're going to be talking about the propositions, that point on the ballot when you start scratching your head and wondering what is all of this about, and you really have to start doing your homework. So we have 3 propositions that we're going to delve into tonight, and I'm really grateful that we have such amazing representatives on both sides of these propositions so that we can really fully understand what's at stake and what are the pros and cons of each one of these propositions. The way we're going to do it is like a little mini debate. Each speaker, pro and con, will have 3 minutes to introduce their side of the issue. Then again, pro and con will have 2 minutes to rebut the other side, and then they'll have a 1-minute close. Our trusty timekeeper, Patty Ahern, will be keeping track of the time and signaling. So you might see her raising some color-coded cards for the speakers to know when to start wrapping it up. And I think that's it. So we're going to start with Proposition 15. This is the split roll taxation proposition. Our pro speaker is Greg Apt. He's the CTA Board of Directors District O, Board of Directors for District O. That covers San Bernardino and Riverside County. And we also have the Honorable Katherine Baker. She's on the con side. She is a former Assemblywoman from District 16, I believe, in Northern California. So whenever you're ready, Greg, Patty will start the timer.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I would like to begin by saying my wife and I have been teachers for over 25 years. We have colleagues who are 2nd and 3rd generation teachers in the state of California. How many of you remember the days when California led the country in education? All community colleges, Cal States, and UCs were free. I started college in the 80s and paid very little for college because of the devastating effects of Prop 13 had just started to take effect on our state. Prop 13 did some good things. It protected homeowners from spiraling property taxes, like for instance from my grandmother. But it also created a devastating unintended consequence. It opened up a loophole for large commercial property owners to avoid paying fair market property taxes. Over 40 years, commercial property taxes have been funneled out of the public schools and into the pockets of wealthy investors, many of whom aren't even based in California. Over that same 40 years, local governments and schools were forced to deal with huge budget shortfalls by slashing programs that benefited students, seniors, working families, and everyday Californians, such as public schools, librarians, affordable housing, fire districts, and public health. Prop 15 is a fair and balanced reform that closes non-residential commercial property tax loopholes benefiting wealthy corporations at the expense of schools and essential services in our local communities. If we want to stay as the 5th largest economy in the world, we need to get real serious, real fast about funding our schools and local services. I want to be clear, Prop 15 will not touch anybody's home, period. It protects all residential and all agricultural property. It closes the loopholes in Prop 13 exploited by wealthy investors. It requires large commercial industrial properties to be assessed based on their fair market value on a regular schedule. It keeps the 1% caps from Prop 13, and this is only on properties valued at over $3 million. It reclaims and invests $12 billion annually in increased and stable revenues for schools, cities, counties, and other special districts, not to the state. It's a roughly 40-60 split between schools and community program funding. It protects Prop 13 for all residential and agricultural property. It provides a tax cut on fixtures and equipment for businesses, has local control for all the revenue generated and spent at the county, city, level. The state doesn't get to touch the money. It ensures transparency in the form of audits and public disclosure. 92% of the revenue comes from just 10% of the commercial property in California, the largest, oldest properties that have gone underassessed the longest. Vast majority of commercial property isn't even impacted. Home-based businesses are exempt, as is agriculture. Prices and property taxes are not connected. If they were, we'd have low prices. Please vote yes on Prop 15. Thank you.
Thank you. Katherine.
Thank you, and thank you to AAUW for almost 50, more than 50 of you are coming together tonight to study your ballot. So good on you for being educated voters and for hearing from both sides, something we don't get enough of in our modern world. I am a no on Proposition 15. I'll just say a little bit about myself, just so you know where I'm coming from. I am a former state legislator. I'm a civilian from politics now. I am not paid by the campaign, and I don't receive any benefit from being in this position or visiting with you tonight. But I'm also a mom. I'm a product of public school myself. I have 2 children who are in public school. My mom was an award-winning public school teacher, so mom brag there. And when I was in the legislature, I was not only known for having a very bipartisan record, but also I won the California School Board Association's Legislator of the Year Award precisely because of the work I did fighting for their budgets and protecting the dollars that go to our schools. And I am a no on Prop 15. Now, I'm no because of what it does and what it doesn't do. And so here are some things that it does that take me to a no position. First of all, and it's a fact-checked issue with my good CTA representative and teacher on the other side, small businesses are hit very, very hard by this proposition. And we care about this because they are the engine of our California economy. They're who employ ourselves and our kids, and they affect the cost of living and employment opportunity in this state. Why are they hit hard? Because that small business exemption that you may hear about is tiny. It only applies to small employers who own the property in which they run their business. 80% of the businesses in California that are small businesses do not own the property in which they operate. They're like the small business clients I work with as an attorney, and they rent. And they rent in a lease that affects every small business who rents property, and it's called a net lease. That means they're required under the lease to pay the property taxes. So the property tax increase is passed right on to them. So that's what it does to our small businesses. It also brings a tremendous amount of uncertainty into what their property tax hit will be, because it will change and fluctuate by market value at least every 3 years, if not more frequently, with no limits in sight as to how far that property tax increase can go. But I also oppose it for what it doesn't do. It will give funding to our schools, but it will not fix the chronic underfunding of our schools that we have. And here's why. We've passed measure after measure the last 20 years trying to support school funding. As I said, that's what I worked on. But we haven't had the accountability and transparency that requires those dollars to get into actual services for our kids so that we can see how it's fixed. And the independent state auditor for the state of California recently came out and said, that's the #1 thing we're doing wrong with our school funding. This proposition repeats that problem. So because of what it does and what it doesn't do, I oppose Prop 15 and encourage you to do the same.
Thank you. Back to you, Greg.
Helps if you unmute. Thank you. Prop 15 creates a split roll, and it treats commercial industrial property different from residential and agricultural property. I agree with the net lease that Katherine was talking about. That affects very few, but if you do one of the net lease leases, you also get a cut rate on your rental, your monthly rental for business owners. So if the property, so just going back a little bit, so 40 years after Prop 13 was passed, which was supposed to keep property taxes low for like our grandmother, our property tax bills were covered in overrides for budget holes blown in our local services. Everyday California is now paying nearly 70% of the property taxes. So before 1978, when Prop 13 was voted on, the property tax breakdown was equal, it was about 50-50. As it currently stands, every middle-class family in a newer home is paying more property taxes than Chevron. I don't get a discount on gas, but people, not businesses, are paying most of the taxes. And this was not the intent of Prop 13. And don't forget, if you bought your property after 1978, you do not benefit from the loophole, as does a corporation owned before. So why aren't the products from these corporations cheaper? Why aren't the leases cheaper, like Katherine was talking about? If they're not paying the property taxes, why is it property values? It's because that's what we're based on. It's dictated on market value. So they're not getting a cut rate on anything. They've just been getting away with not paying taxes for 40 years or lower taxes than everybody else. We've been nickeled and dimed for 40 years with things like increased sales taxes, impact fees, and bonds, in addition to the endless bake sales that PTA has to do to pay for field trips. Moreover, the first time I heard the opposition talk, a lot of this talk you're hearing is a slippery slope to the residential property. I truly understand the campaign. The central theme for the opposition is basically how to confuse voters into not voting yes.
Katherine.
I've got to get off mute too. So famous words for 2020. Thank you. Well, a couple of points in rebuttal just to put out there for you. The first is, again, going back to schools and what they'll receive. What's important to know is our schools will not see a single penny of these this new tax increase that's coming to us for years out into the future. The tax will start on our businesses right away, but they won't see the money until later, number one. Number two, the state gets to take the cream of that money off the top first, over $1 billion a year, before our schools get those dollars. And again, the schools don't see any money until the 2024-2025 fiscal year. And they get less than half. Our schools are only going to get 40% of whatever comes out to them 3 or 4 years down the line from now, after the state has taken the first $1 billion off the top. So I point that out about the schools. You also heard that no agricultural property is affected. That's not quite factually true. In fact, the land that agriculture, that our food is grown on may not be covered by this, but all the structures on top of the land that farmers need to bring food to table, they are not exempt from this tax increase. And so our farmers will be dealing with that, and we'll see it in the cost of our food prices in a state that's already very, very expensive to live in. And finally, I want to point out the figure that you may have heard from Greg, and I appreciate that, which is that 92% of the tax that's going to be paid by this is only going to go to 10% of the businesses in California. Problem with that figure is, first of all, it's looking at the property and not the actual business who's paying it. And it doesn't include 35% of businesses in California. So, you're going to hear numbers from us, but it's very important to remember what a hit this is to our food costs and small businesses who are suffering. How many of you have seen some of your favorite places that have been in business in California for years, laying people off, closing permanently, and unable to hire more? And we don't need to do that at this time. And I'll say this, and I may have to use my last minute for it. There's a better way to fix the problems that you may see in Prop 13, but it's only possible if we vote no on 15 and go back to those better ways.
Thank you. Okay, last minute. This is the wrap up. Greg.
All right, thank you. First off, I would like to thank Chris Goodfellow and the AAUW for inviting me to attend your October meeting. I'd also like to throw in a quick issue to bring up. The opposition included residential property protections in their ballot rebuttal, and were ordered by the courts to remove the wording, which about a third of their wording for their statement, because it was an outright lie to the voters. Unfortunately, the court order does not cover the misleading television ads that are currently airing. In closing, I would like you to envision the idea of educating the whole child. Educating the whole child isn't just through school, it is community-based. It's about feeling safe in your neighborhood. It's about having the money to provide for parks, healthcare, fire departments, police departments, and schools. Prop 15 will generate approximately $13 million for our schools and approximately $21 million for our city. So thank you, and don't forget.
Oh, Greg, you muted. All right, Katherine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, AAUW, for having it tonight and studying your ballot. And I want to give you a teaser there that there's a better way, because there are many who do believe there are some problems with Prop 13, and they want to address what they see in those problems. This is not the fix. It repeats the same mistakes we've made for decades on school funding by promising, wow, we're going to get all this money. And then a few years later, our schools are still in the same chronic underfunding. It has no accountability or transparency about how those dollars will be spent. And if we're going to hit businesses this hard with these taxes, we need to get it right. And here's one way to do it. Go back to the drawing board. Vote no on Prop 15 and require our leaders to go back to the drawing board. Adopt the bipartisan proposals for closing real loopholes in Prop 15 that didn't get into this proposition, and focus on those. But it's only possible to adopt what have been bipartisan proposals in the legislature time and again if we oppose this effort. this passes and we don't have the opportunity to get it right. And we really do, because our schools do deserve more funding, but not if we get it wrong.
Thank you both. I really appreciate this. I want to just answer a question that was in the chat, and that is that this is Prop 15 would modify Prop 13. That's correct, right?
It does. It modifies Prop 13 by taking away, and I'll do this in the most least biased way I can, but instead of your purchase price being the basis for what your tax increases would be in the future, it would be tied to market value, which fluctuates. And instead of only reassessing the property on a certain basis, it could be reassessed at least once every 3 years, if not more frequently. So it changes what the tax is tied to and how frequently you can increase it.
For commercial property, not for residential.
Only for commercial
only
property.
For commercial properties.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you guys. We're gonna move on to Proposition 22.
Thank you. And thank you, Greg.
Thank
Okay.
you also. Thank you, everybody.
We have Proposition 22 would be a rollback of the gig economy laws that were passed last year. So these are the Uber, Lyft workers, and whether or not those people are contractors or need to be classified as employees. Speaking on the pro side is Keith Griffith, who is a senior coalition coordinator for the Yes on Prop 22 campaign. He specializes in grassroots outreach and coalition building. And on the no side is Claire Lau, coalition coordinator for No on Prop 22. Claire is a former teacher, artist, activist, and organizer who has worked on several campaigns, and she's based out of San Francisco. So thank you guys for joining us tonight. We're going to start with Kyle. Did I say Keith? I'm so sorry.
You did, and it's real funny because that's my dad's name. So
I'm so sorry. Kyle, my apologies.
No, it's all right. Hey, I appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kyle Griffith. I'm the Senior Coalitions Coordinator for the Yes on 22 campaign. Just for background, more than 1 million Californians at any one point in time drive for app-based food, grocery, and rideshare companies. And these drivers are classified as independent contractors because it affords them the flexibility and independence to work when, where, and how long they want. However, new state laws, AB 5 here in California threatens to make it illegal for these folks to continue working as independent contractors. And, you know, for 80% of these drivers, it's truly part-time work. These are, you know, parents that are driving when their kids are in school, caretakers who have a loved one sick at home, or, you know, students driving in between classes. You know, the reasons are all different, but the reason why they do this work is because it works for them. And prohibiting independent contract work for app-based drivers would eliminate hundreds of thousands of jobs at the worst possible time. In survey after survey, these drivers continue to express that they prefer being classified as independent contractors. Typically, we say by a 4-to-1 margin, but there was a new survey released today by the rideshare guy, who is an independent analyst that tracks trends in the ride-sharing community. And by these most recent numbers, 68.9% of app-based drivers prefer the independent contractor model, and more than 60% of drivers support Proposition 22, because quite simply, they don't want to be employees, and the employment model just doesn't work for them. First and foremost, these drivers would lose the flexibility to set their own hours and choose where, when, and how long they work. For consumers, it means longer wait times and higher prices, and potentially even the loss of services completely in many parts of the state, because quite simply, there won't be enough drivers to meet demand, and there won't be enough demand to justify having those drivers there. So what's the solution? It's Proposition 22. Proposition 22 protects the ability of app-based drivers to continue choosing work as independent contractors. It will save hundreds of thousands of jobs when they're needed most, and it will improve the quality of app-based work by adding new earnings and benefit guarantees for drivers. It will require each platform, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Postmates, Instacart, and many others, to provide their drivers with a guaranteed minimum earnings of at least 120% of the minimum wage in whatever market they're driving, and with 30 cents a mile for compensation. It adds access to healthcare, medical and disability coverage for on-the-job injuries and illnesses, up to $1 million, similar to workers' compensation, and adds new public safety protections. Berkeley Research Group found that forcing these companies to treat their drivers like employees would eliminate 80 to 90% of jobs. So I urge everyone here to vote yes on Proposition 22 and save these app-based jobs and services.
Thank you. Claire, you're up now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me, Chris. My name is Claire Lau. I'm the coalition coordinator for the No on Prop 22 campaign. Let me just start off by saying that Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, Postmates, Instacart have spent $184 million on Prop 22, writing it, paying to put it on the ballot, and now you're seeing all these ads on TV, on social media. This ballot measure has become the most expensive thing ever on the California ballot in California's entire history. So just think about that for a second. Now, what does Prop 22 do? It is a special exemption that would exempt all of these app companies from providing the very basic responsibilities that all other employers in California must provide. Under Prop 22, they will pay no paid sick leave, no minimum wage, no unemployment insurance, no breaks for meals or rest periods, no health care, no workers' compensation when drivers are hurt on the job. And all of this is during a pandemic. According to a 2020 study conducted by the University of California, if Uber and Lyft had rightfully treated their drivers as employees over the past 5 years, they would have paid $413 million into the state's unemployment insurance funds. Instead, during this pandemic, all of us taxpayers are basically filling in for the slack that these companies have refused to pay. Prop 22 claims to do a lot of things. It claims that these drivers will have a minimum earning of $16.80 an hour, but a UC Berkeley research found that Prop 22 would actually pay a driver as low as $5.64 an hour when you account for all of the out-of-pocket costs, all of the lack of basic benefits, and the time they reported in for work, ready in their car to drive, but are not counting as actively serving a customer, which accounts for around 20 minutes every hour that a driver is driving. Some of the things you might have heard is it improves safety, has sexual harassment protections, but the fact is that Uber and Lyft are already required by law to conduct criminal background checks, and Prop 22 will eliminate required sexual harassment trainings that all employers have to provide to their workers, and it also weakens protections under California law to investigate customers and driver sexual harassment claims. If they really wanted to provide these protections, they wouldn't need to write themselves a special exemption. They can just do it right now and follow the law. So Prop 22 is opposed by labor organizations like the California Federation of Teachers, National Nurses United, activist Dolores Huerta is against Prop 22, the California Democratic Party is against Prop 22, and well over 100 elected officials, including Vice President Joe Biden, Senators Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren are also against Prop 22.
Thank you. Kyle, back to you.
Proposition 22 was crafted as a solution to the mess created by AB 5. As of the end of the legislative session, there were more than 110 exemptions to AB 5 because it created so many issues. And app-based work is truly unique kind of work. There's no other job where you can be actively engaged in working for two companies at the same time. You can't be a cashier at McDonald's and see that there's a line at Starbucks across the street where the line's out a door, and you can't say, hey, I'm gonna go work at Starbucks for a little bit. I'll be back in about 20. Is that okay? Because that's just not how it would work. But with app-based work, you can. These drivers are able to work for multiple companies at the same time. They're able to work when it is convenient for them. That's why they support Proposition 22. It adds economic security that was missing. It protects the flexibility and independence that they are looking for, and it does add access to healthcare starting at 15 hours a week and becomes a full contribution to a covered California plan at 25 hours a week. That is more generous than traditional forms of employment, who we already know do whatever they can to avoid paying their employees their rights. However, Prop 22 is a benefit that will that seeks to balance the needs and desires for economic security and additional benefits for drivers, while also maintaining the flexibility and independence that enables these services to continue operating. hundreds of thousands of jobs, and the services that millions of people are rely on are on the balance. These services are crucial to helping reduce DUIs in markets, when bars are back open. They provide vital transportation options for seniors and disabled folks who do not own their own cars or or lack access to reliable public transportation. So Prop 22, which we hope you will support, is going to be absolutely vital to helping our economic recovery. Thank you.
Claire.
So I'd like to address the point about flexibility. There are several things that the ads say that most drivers only drive a few hours a week. First, UC Santa Cruz research found that 70% of drivers drive more than 30 hours a week, and 50% of drivers drive more than 40 hours a week. The second thing you hear is that Prop 22, if Prop 22 doesn't pass, drivers will lose their flexibility. That is completely not true. There's nothing in current California state law that prevents a company from allowing part-time employees from setting their own shift schedules and being receiving the benefits of an employee. I actually personally used to work as a substitute teacher, and I could decide exactly when I wanted to work. I could work as little as 1 day a month. I could work 5 days a week. And I was still paid as an employee and had paid sick leave and unemployment insurance. And in fact, at the same period of time, I was working as an art teacher, as a contractor. And there, I had a very fixed schedule. And when COVID first hit, and I applied for unemployment insurance, only the substitute teacher job that was paying me as an employee paid into my unemployment insurance and gave me the flexibility at that time. So the other point that you've heard about healthcare is that it says, Prop 22 says that if drivers drive for 25 hours a week, they'll get 85% of coverage under Covered California. However, that only counts the active hours when a driver is actively serving a customer, and that is about only 2/3 of the time they're driving. And so a driver would actually have to drive for 39 hours a week in order to receive the full benefits under Prop 22, which at that point, they are actually a full-time driver.
Thank you. Kyle, for the close.
Thank you. Claire's right. There's nothing in the law that requires these companies to provide flexibility. That's just simple economics. There was a company called Deliv that switched to the full employment model under AB5 and was lauded by the author of AB5 and the very organizations that are opposing Prop 22. Less than 1 year later, more than 600 people lost their jobs, and employees were, quote, not all happy as employees. They were asked to choose their hours a week in advance. They were forced to wear uniforms, and eventually this company had to close. These companies are not threatening or using fear tactics. It's just a reality is that AB5 has created a situation where, these companies are not able to operate, and these drivers are going to lose access to earning opportunities when they're needed most. I urge everyone here on this call to join more than 110,000 drivers in support of this measure, as well as organizations like the California State NAACP, the National Action Network, California Chamber of Commerce, and more than 125 others in support of Proposition 22. Thanks.
Thank you.
So,
Claire.
in closing, I'd like to remind everyone that Lyft and Uber and these companies have put $184 million into Prop 22, the most of any California ballot measure or anything on a ballot. If these app companies really wanted to benefit their workers, they would be providing them with protective equipment during the pandemic instead of spending this money on Prop 22. And let's remember that 78% of drivers are people of color, and they're essential workers, and they're helping California through our pandemic right now, and they deserve better. They deserve to be, a lot of these drivers, Latino, Black, Asian American, they deserve to be treated as proper workers, to have their rights to pay sick leave, healthcare, unemployment benefits, and to have flexibility in their scheduling. So that's why I urge everyone to vote no on Prop 22.
Thank you. Thank you both. There is a question that I'm going to put in the chat. If you want to stick around and answer that, feel free. But I think it's too lengthy for us to get into right now with the time schedule that we have. But thank you both very much. Okay, the last proposition that we're going to be discussing tonight is Proposition 24, which is a change in the consumer privacy law. I think this is the most confusing proposition on the ballot, I got to be honest. Speaking on the pro side is Sandra Lowe. Sandra is a longstanding DNC member with a background in labor. She's worked as a teacher with the California Teachers Association. On the no side is Mary Ann Stone. Mary was the co-author of the California Consumer Privacy Act, so the act that we just passed. And she's a former president of the California Consumer Privacy and is now chairperson of the No on Proposition 24 campaign. So I think we're thrilled to have both of you here. And with that, we're going to get started with Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, AAUW. I have a long-standing relationship working with you over the years through my work at CTA. And then after that, I was the strategist at the California Democratic Party in 2018. So it's great to be among friends. So, as Chris said, there are many people that are confused, but my job as a teacher is always to make things so that they're not confusing and very simple to understand. And the reason that I got involved in this campaign is because for me, it's all about the kids. When COVID struck, every single kid in California, in fact, most of the country, went on some form of distance learning. And so instead of being out there playing dodgeball, they're sitting in front of a computer or a tablet all day long, receiving their instructions. And they are vulnerable to having data breaches. Every single week, there is a data breach that is recorded that happens in a Zoom meeting or something else. And if we are going to close the digital divide among kids in California, we can't just throw them a laptop and say we're done with it. We have to also take care of their privacy. Prop 24 triples the fines against kids and puts in an enforcement agency that is not in the current law. And we need to have that enforcement agency because the Attorney General said he can only do about 3 cases a year. We need an enforcement agency because just like in campaign finance reform, there's no sense passing a law and then not having the Fair Political Practices Commission to oversee it. How would you get a remedy? How would you know who to go to? So this is an important part. This is also modeled after the very successful European law. And so there are many factors in there that address not sharing sensitive information and also have protections. You heard from my colleagues in labor about labor organizing. That's why AFSCME, the building trades, the California professional firefighters are in favor of this because it protects workers when they're trying to organize not to be retaliated again by the managers. We are so happy that we have a lot of legislators on board with us because they know if we don't pass the law through this initiative that they're going to be sieged by tech lobbyists that are going to try and roll this back. That's why it can be amended with a simple majority only to increase privacy, not to roll it back. So it not only protects 24, but it protects all the consumer privacy laws in California, which is necessary. We're grateful to be endorsed by the LA Times, by Betty Yee, by Congressman Khanna, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here tonight. My name is Mary Ross, and I'm here to ask you to oppose Prop 24. The yes side has spent a lot of money paying consultants to shill for this flawed proposition. They are claiming it will increase privacy protections in California. This is a lie. I know because I was a co-author and a proponent of the California Consumer Privacy Act and formerly president of Californians for Consumer Privacy, the group behind Prop 24. Our current privacy law, the CCPA, was an initiative that was going to be on the 2018 ballot until Sacramento passed it through the legislature. This law just went into effect on January 1st, 2020, and the Attorney General just started enforcing it. It gives all Californians the right to find out what personal information businesses are collecting about them, their devices, and their children, the right to opt out of the sale of their personal information, the right to delete your personal information, and the right to hold businesses accountable if they fail to protect your personal information and your identity is breached. The 52 pages of Prop 24 rolls back these protections by weakening definitions, undermining enforcement, and making it harder for you to exercise your rights, including the right to opt out of the sale of your personal information. Worse, it exposes undocumented immigrants to increased risk of harassment by ICE. It continues to allow for digital redlining that marginalizes people of color, stigmatizes their communities, and creates costly barriers to them owning homes. It permits employer surveillance that threatens workers' ability to organize into unions. And it furthers the ability of corporations to use unregulated facial recognition technology that furthers the surveillance of Black Californians and workers. Prop 24 asks voters to vote for pay for privacy. This is egregious. In California, we have a right to privacy established by our Constitution. Charging to exercise our right to privacy is akin to charging a poll tax to vote. Unfortunately, our disadvantaged communities are often most harmed by violations of privacy. Privacy should not be turned into a commodity that only the wealthy can afford. Last February, in Politico's new publication, Protocol, Izzy Lepowski documented how big corporations, including Facebook and Experian, whose bad behavior this law is supposed to check, lobbied the proponents. It worked. Industry's heavy-handed influence is apparent throughout the final version of the 52 pages of Prop 24. In contrast, hardly any of the 45 suggested changes by 11 privacy advocacy groups were incorporated. Enforcement is the key to any successful privacy law. I agree with the authors of Prop 24 that California needs a data protection agency. Unfortunately, this one is a woefully underfunded paper tiger that delays enforcement and undermines the Office of the Attorney General. This is why we call on you to join Dolores Huerta, the ACLU of California, Color of Change, CHIRLA, Consumer Federation, the California Small Business Association, the California Nurses Association, the League of Women Voters, and many other individuals and organizations, as well as 18 editorial boards across the state in opposing Prop 24.
Thank you. Sandra.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Mary, for the work that you did on the law that we have now. So the way it worked out is there was going to be an initiative, and the legislature appealed to the authors. Mary was involved with it and said, we'd like to do this through the legislature. And, you know, honestly, wouldn't we all? I mean, it sounds like that's the way to do it. So it went through the legislature, and Mary's quote was, "This law needs to be cleaned up." And we agree. Because what happened was what we thought might happen. As soon as it went into the legislature, the tech lobbyists started wanting to pull this piece out, and pull this piece out, and pull that piece out, and put this piece in, and it ended up to be a real problem. We had some real stalwarts that fought for us. Hannah Beth Jackson was one of them, who just absolutely said, we cannot deal with this constant lobbying. So as a result, the legislature appealed to us this time and said, please put it on the ballot. We need to make sure that we can get this law clean as a whistle to the people, establish a baseline, and make sure there's an enforcement agency without having tech lobbyists all over us. And so that's what happened, and that's why we have NAACP, ROCANA, Consumer Watchdog, Common Sense Media, the past president of PTA, past president of CTA, all of them with us, because they know this is the right way to go. And don't let a long law confuse you. It's not long, it's complete. It makes sure that everything is taken care of. And don't fall for the scare tactics. There's no way I would support anything on the ballot that would hurt any immigrant in California. I fought my whole life to make sure that they weren't injured. And some of these are just pure scare tactics. This is a good law, and I urge you to vote yes.
Mary.
In response, I will read from the League of Women Voters Independent Analysis. We oppose due to the complexity of a 52-page initiative with impacts and nuances that are difficult for voters to discern and rollbacks to existing protections. Among the troubling aspects of Prop 24 is its expansion of pay for privacy. The initiative also weakens the current legal requirement that companies respect a global opt-out. These burdens are fundamentally inequitable, placing the onus on the average consumer to protect their own privacy. The Mercury News wrote, one provision of Prop 24 demonstrates why it doesn't deserve support. It would allow the legislature to approve an amendment with a simple majority vote with this caveat. The law should be amended if necessary to improve its operation, provided that the amendments do not compromise or weaken consumer privacy while giving attention to the impact on business and innovation. Wow, how much attention needs to be given to the impact on business and innovation? Does it mean that the law strengthening consumer privacy is illegal if it negatively impacts businesses? To what degree? Bring on the lawyers. California's courtrooms are crowded enough without the rash of lawsuits this provision would bring. And finally, the San Francisco Chronicle. And here's one more thing for voters to consider. If Prop 24 were really as restrictive and airtight as advertised, is there any doubt that those who are exploiting our personal information as a commodity would be pouring tens of millions of dollars into defeating it? Their silence is telling. A good guiding principle for approaching these complicated initiatives is, when in doubt, vote no. It goes against a Californian's instinct to reject what is advertised as a privacy protection initiative, but some objects on the ballot are smaller than they appear. There are no advancements into this law, this initiative, that could not be enacted by the California legislature after public hearings and vettings to assure that they are actually achieve their intended purpose and the ability to course correct for unintended consequences that emerge. There's sufficient doubt about Prop 24 to make the decision clear. Vote no.
Thank you. Sandra.
Thank you. And in wrapping up, I'm just going to ask you a simple question. I mean, if you think we have enough privacy laws in California right now and everything is fine and that it's okay for two kids to go sit outside of Taco Bell on unsecured wireless to do their homework without any protections for them or any way to remediate the situation through an agency, if you think that's perfectly okay, then sure, vote no, and let's just take our chances on the tech lobbyists and the legislature. But if you're with me and you say, let's set a floor, let's make sure our kids are protected, let's make sure we triple the fines, let's make sure we have an agency, let's make sure that we pass this through the voters so that the lobbyists can't whittle it away. If you believe in that, then you've got to say yes on 24. And if you're saying yes on 24, you're going to be in very, very good company, because the state Senate is all with us. The the NAACP, Consumer Watchdog, Common Sense Media, and it's urgent. Thank you.
And finally, Mary.
As currently written, Prop 24 sabotages the consumer privacy rights established by current law, the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA. In conclusion, I wish to remind you of the history of the CCPA. We needed an initiative to get Sacramento to pass it, but they did, and California now has the most comprehensive privacy law in the United States, a model that other states and perhaps even the federal government will follow. Corporate lobbyists tried to weaken the law through Sacramento, but the nonprofit Privacy Advocates were its vocal defender and the law remained strong. The process worked. Privacy legislation is complicated. Case in point, Prop 24 is 52 pages long. Further, the CCPA is so new, we don't know what needs to be changed. Give the CCPA a chance to work, then tweak it through the legislature so that all stakeholders have a chance to be heard, and through a process that provides a bit more transparency and accountability for elected officials who answer to the people who voted them into and out of office. Vote no on Prop 24. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for participating. Again, there are a couple of questions in the chat. If you would like to answer that, feel free. And I am so grateful to all of our amazing speakers. There's a lot of praise for everybody who participated tonight and representing each side of this. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone who participated in this debate on these issues. It really gave us a lot of information that I think that we need to make an informed decision about these particular propositions. Unfortunately, there are many other propositions that are on the ballot that we probably also need to study more deeply as far as that's concerned. For those who participated, the panelists, if you would like to leave us, you are more than welcome to do so. We do have a short business meeting for the AAUW Redlands branch that we need to conduct at this time. And so we are going to continue on with our business session, but we really appreciate you coming and helping us out in this area with our program. So thank you for coming and thank you for the program. And Chris, you did a wonderful job once again. Thanks a lot. Okay, now let's continue on with our business program that we need to take care of. First of all, let me share with you, I'm going to share my screen with you. We have some birthdays that we need to recognize here. And so let me start the slideshow here from you. We need to recognize our October birthdays. And our October birthdays this year include Kathy Albertson, Luann Bangsdom, Susan Bitley, Patricia Stubbs, Diane Landeros, Carolyn Ritchie, Suzanne Cranston, Shirley Harlan, Deb Sidley, Diane Shimoda, Karen Skoog, Ellen Cope, Erica Wilson, Whitney Zick, and Amber Costa and Valerie Boone. So we wish you all a very happy birthday and hope you enjoy your birthdays during the month of October.